Welcome back to Catalyst University. My name is Kevin Tokoph, and in this video, we're going to be talking extensively about core strengthening. And not just the TRA or transversus abdominis, but the core as a whole. How do we go after all these muscles and make them stronger? One thing I think in physical therapy that we tend to do pretty well is going after and strengthening the TRA, the transversus abdominis. If you're looking at the low back pain classification system, somebody in the stabilization subgroup, or really anyone that needs core strengthening, I guarantee you if you sampled every physical therapist in the country, they'd probably get a pretty good list of TRA exercises. They'd target that muscle and it probably does get stronger in their patients. What we don't do well is remembering that there's three other major core muscles: the rectus abdominis, the external obliques, and the internal obliques. I think if you look at a lot of planicares, especially for individuals with low back pain or hip issues, maybe it's even a core issue, there's really not a lot of exercises that target these other muscles. And don't forget that even though each of the core muscles has individual unique functions, like the obliques do side bending and rotation, the rectus abdominis is more for trunk flexion. Every one of them has the function of bracing the core, stabilizing all the abdominal contents and contributing to intra-abdominal pressure, which is necessary for when you lift heavy objects and do all sorts of strenuous activities. So I think you're doing a disservice by only going after the TRA. It's not that going after the TRA is bad, but you're forgetting all these other muscles that are very important for the core and for overall function. How often have you had a patient lying in supine and you tell them, all right, I want you to sit up, and they practically look like they're deadlifting 500 kilograms, getting red in the face just sitting up? Well, that function involves the rectus abdominis and the obliques, and it looks very strenuous for a lot of these people when that should be an easy movement. So we need to be going after these muscles a lot more than we already do. So this is a study that looked at the various activations of different muscles of the core with different exercises, and they quantified these with EMG, electromyography. And there's been a lot of studies that have done this. There's also a systematic review, so I'll post that one and this one in the comments of this video. But what you can see here are the exercises that tend to have the best activation of each of the core muscles. See, they've divided it into upper and lower rectus abdominis, external obliques, and internal obliques. And so mainly in this video, we're going to be looking at the first five. Okay, these are the most difficult. They get the most muscle activation, but you can regress any one of these to where most patients are going to be able to at least do something that mimics these movements. And you can also see some other ones down here, like reverse crunch in a flat position, crunches, bent knee sit-up. These get less muscle activation than these other ones up at the top. And that may be appropriate for some patients. You don't necessarily need to go to a power wheel rollout. That's a very difficult exercise, but for a high-level patient, it can be exceptional for strengthening the rectus abdominis, and you can even see you get obliques here. Okay, so if you look at all of these exercises here, you can see that it activates the entire core musculature. It just so happens that each one has a particular muscle that is predominant. For example, in a power wheel rollout, you see that the rectus abdominis is predominant. You can see here it still gets the obliques pretty darn good. It's just that the rectus abdominis predominates. The way I have this table set up is I have boxed for each muscle or region of the muscle which two exercises yield the greatest activation. So for example, for upper rectus abdominis, the power wheel rollout and a reverse crunch inclined at 30 degrees, those yield the greatest upper rectus abdominis activation. If we were to look at, let's say, external obliques, well, the two exercises that yield the greatest activation are power wheel pikes and power wheel knee-ups. And what we're going to do in the course of this video is go through all five of these exercises, plus some extras that are not included in this study, or actually many other studies, that tend to be really good for getting those muscles activated and stronger. So let's first start with the rectus abdominis. Now, when it comes to the rectus abdominis, I don't care so much about upper versus lower fibers. Some people might, depending on maybe a sport or an activity that somebody has to do. I just kind of personally treat it as one muscle. But in general, you can see a trend here. So the power wheel rollout, which is just a fancy term for an ab rollout with an ab roller, those are a monster of rectus abdominis activation. You can also see here the hanging knee ups with straps. That gets more lower rectus. And then a reverse crunch inclined at 30 degrees, that gets the upper rectus a lot more. Those three exercises, if you are someone more in an advanced category for strengthening and you want to target rectus abdominis, you can probably get by with those three exercises and get massive gains in that muscle. I also threw in here another one. It's a little less advanced than some of these. It's called kneeling ab crunches, and we'll be going over that in just a few minutes. But we're first going to go over the three that were included in this study. Let's take a look right now. Now, in my opinion and the opinion of the study, the mother of all ab exercises is the ab rollout. Now, there are two different ways to do ab rollouts. One is with a barbell. And the disadvantage of the barbell is not only do you have to have access to a barbell, but you have to put plates on the side, which adds weight. The plates also have to be entirely circular. They can't be the kind that have those little straight edges. Otherwise, it won't roll and it defeats the purpose of the exercise. But if you have access to that and you're able to do it, it is a great exercise. If you don't have access to those, or your gym maybe has plates that have the straight edges, then you do need an ab roller. And with ab rollers, like this one, there are two types. One type has these little foot attachments where you can strap your feet in and do variations, which are also regressions of the ab rollout. They're a little bit easier. They get a little bit less activity of the core muscles, but they're still very good. Don't get me wrong. The other type of ab roller doesn't have these. It literally just has the handles where you can then roll out. And that particular exercise is the most difficult of all of these. It gets the most activation of the core muscles, and you will feel those muscles working. You will probably feel it the next day if you're not used to that exercise. So how do you do an ab rollout? Well, the first thing you want to make sure is that, one, you have some air in your lungs before you roll out. The reason being is once you start rolling back in, you're going to exhale pretty hard. And the way you're going to exhale is through pursed lips. We do this a lot with core exercises. You're going to pretend you're blowing out a candle and you're going to do it forcefully. The other thing you're going to do both on your way out and back in is you're going to brace your core, particularly your transversus abdominis. The easiest way to do this is going to be to draw your belly button in towards your spine. That's going to brace the core. It's also going to get a little bit of rectus abdominis to begin with, which we're trying to work in this exercise anyway. So it gives you a kind of a double whammy. So you want to make sure you're using proper breathing technique and brace the core. The other thing you want to make sure you're doing is as you're rolling out, you're not getting a lot of lumbar extension. You're not arching the back, or it's not forcing it into a passive arch too much. This is not good, especially for people who have low back issues. So you want to make sure you're keeping as close to a neutral low back as possible throughout this exercise. So I'm going to breathe in a little bit, maybe not maximally, but I'm going to breathe in enough to get some air to eventually blow out. And then when I get to the end there, I'm going to brace the core even stronger, exhale and curl back up. Now, another really good core exercise that they looked at in this study that gets the rectus abdominis and the obliques is what's called a hanging knee up. Now, to really do these effectively, you should have these straps here that can hang from a pull-up bar or something like that. You can do it just hanging like this, and you can certainly do it from the dip handles, but it's most effective with these. And the reason being, if we're trying to get activation and really focus on these muscles, we don't have to want to worry about our grip. We don't have to want to worry about our lats or our chest. We want to take those out of the equation as much as we can. Just like we might want to take balance out of the equation for other exercises, like for the glutes. Let's take other things out of the equation so we can really focus on these guys right here. So let me show you how these work. So I got these already set up here. I ordered these on Amazon, and I will put a link to these in the description. These are actually a less expensive version that I found. but they work just fine. So you want these things fairly close together. You don't want them wide out. You want them close together so that way when you hang, your arms can be close together. I also don't want these on the distal part of my arm. I want them more proximal. Not cutting off the circulation in the axilla or the armpit, but somewhere like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab on right here. I can use an overhand grip or an underhand grip. And then I'm just going to kind of step off. If you're tall like me, you can kind of keep your feet on the ground. If not, you will have to hang, but that already gets the abs activated. Now, with this exercise, the basic movement looks like this. Okay? When we do this, we're not just repping it out like that. We're not doing that. We want to really engage those ab muscles, come up, hold, and then come back down. Now, when I do it entirely directly in front of myself in the sagittal plane, like that, that gets rectus abdominis. It also gets the obliques, but it mainly gets rectus abdominis. However, I can bias the obliques by adding a little bit of rotation at the trunk or the spine, and that will take a little bit off of rectus abdominis and put more in the obliques. That would look like this. And then I can do the other side. And then I can go back to the center. That would be mostly rectus abdominis. Another exercise for the core that we're going to go over is what's called the reverse crunch. Now, I think it's really important to differentiate between a regular crunch and a reverse crunch. In a regular crunch or sit-up, the legs are static and the torso is mobile. And if you've got a really heavy upper body, you probably need your legs held down to be able to sit up all the way potentially, okay? But that's a regular crunch or a sit-up. In a reverse crunch or a reverse sit-up, usually just called a reverse crunch, now the torso's static and the legs are mobile. So one way that people do this is you start with the legs straight. You can't see it, but my knees are straight, and the heels are elevated off the floor. And then what you do is you crunch these up, and then come back. And one goal of this is to be able to not only crunch these up, but even get the butt a little bit off the floor. That's going to be much easier if you're able to hold on to something up here, whether it's a bar, a weight, or something, but the gist of it is like that, and doing it with control. That is a reverse crunch. Here, I'm doing it from level ground or 0 degrees. What they found in the study is that if you do this on an incline, technically it's more of a decline from this position, it's going to be more effective. And they look specifically at 30 degrees. I don't know if this is exactly 30 degrees, but this is the best that I've got. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to lay back, I'm going to hold on to these handles really tight here. I'm technically using an underhand grip, so my palms are facing my face. So I'm going to hold on here, and the overall movement, I'm going to start here, knees more or less straight. Realistically, if I can, I'd like to start with the heels elevated off the floor because that's going to pre-engage the core. From there, I'm going to bend my knees toward my chest, and once they get as close to my chest as I'm able, I'm going to crunch and bring my butt off of the bench. Hold for a second, come back with control, let the legs come back out with control. Best way to get it is just to see it. So here we go. There's one. There's two. When you're doing this, especially the crunch part, the most important thing there is to make sure that you are really turning your pelvis toward your face, really trying to engage those rectus abdominis muscles. So if you're just haphazardly bringing the legs up, you'll probably get some rectus abdominis, but we want to be very intentional with this movement. So when we do this, I always say control is best, and usually that means slowing the movement down. So starting here, bring the legs up, and really engaging those rectus abdominis muscles, come back with control, and then come back down, like that. Now the last rectus abdominis exercise we're going to be looking at here is the kneeling ab crunch. This exercise was not included in any of the EMG studies as far as I'm aware, so we don't know the specific muscle activation. However, if you do this correctly, you will absolutely feel the rectus abdominis working, okay? Now, to perform this exercise, you need one of several things. Either you need a cable machine, okay? Or you need something where you can anchor a band really high up like this. And this is, again, not one of those typical TheraBands or elastic bands you get in the physical therapy clinic. This is a really, really strong one. Some people call them monster bands or they're pull-up bar bands, but they're really, really strong ones, okay? If you try to do this with a regular TheraBand, I don't care how light of a person you are, when you do this, you're not gonna be pushing down against gravity. And if anything, you're going to be controlling against gravity with your posterior chain. So this needs to be a pretty strong band, and it needs to be anchored high up. If you're putting it at like this height here, it's not going to work. So you do have to have that. If you don't have any of those, most gyms have an abdominal crunch machine that works just fine, okay? Don't let anyone tell you that bending the spine is bad. It is not. In fact, for strengthening these muscles, most of the time in the clinic, we don't do enough of it. Now, how does this movement work? Well, you're in the tall kneeling position like this, and you really want these bands kind of next to your head. The way I think about it is you're going to take each end of the band and put it right above your ears, okay, on the side of your head, and you're going to lock them in there. If we start doing a lot with the arms, we're kind of getting into row or lat pull down territory, and that's not what we're trying to do, okay? Now, first of all, when you do this movement, if you just do it like this haphazardly, okay, you notice a couple of things. Okay, one, my back is staying straight, okay? I'm really just more or less working the hip flexors, and honestly, I really don't even feel those working. It's really just a hip flexion movement, but I'm not working the rectus abdominis. If I want to work the rectus abdominis, I need to crunch. I don't want it to be a situation where my back is staying straight. I actually want the trunk to bend, and I want to feel these rectus abdominis muscles working. So make sure you can feel those muscles working. Turn this into a crunch movement. The easiest way to do that is once you get in position here, I want you to drive your elbows into the top of your thigh. You may not get them there, but going in that direction will get you that crunch type of movement. Let's take a look at that right here. So there's your kneeling ab crunch. Now, when it comes to the external and internal obliques, some people, again, may want to differentiate those. I think it's sufficient for the vast majority of people to just include them in one unit, the obliques. And yes, I do know that the internal and external obliques have slightly different actions, especially when it comes to rotation. But again, they rotate the spine, they side bend the spine, and they participate in trunk flexion just like the rectus abdominis. So what we can see here, again, a little bit of a trend, the external obliques, they're going to benefit the most from the other two power wheel exercises. So while the rollouts get more rectus abdominis, the pikes and the knee ups get external obliques. And then if we look at internal obliques, it's just the hanging knee ups with straps and the reverse crunch at 30 degrees that we already talked about for rectus abdominis. So if you're already doing those latter two exercises for the rectus abdominis, you're already getting them for the internal obliques. So the only thing you might want to do is add these other two that get the external obliques. You already have a power wheel for the rollouts, so how about the pike and the knee up, those getting the external obliques. Now, before we look at these other power wheel exercises, the pike and the knee up, I want to cover 3 other oblique exercises that are not covered in the study. And again, I'm going mainly off of clinical experience and my own personal fitness experience with those. And those are Roman chair side bends, standing weighted side bends, and Paloff rotations, which is a variation of the Paloff press, but instead of being a press, it's going to be rotation. Now with the side bends, if you have a Roman chair, that is ideal. That is a monster exercise for getting the obliques firing. Standing weighted side bends are not quite as good, so I would say if you have a Roman chair, do this one. If you don't have a Roman chair, definitely do this one. You don't necessarily need to do both of them. You're really just trying to target that side bending, but I happen to think that the Roman chair version is superior to the standing weighted ones. Let's take a look at these oblique exercises right now. The first oblique exercise we're going to be looking at is side bending on a Roman chair. Now, as far as I know, this exercise has never been officially studied via EMG. I'm not actually sure why. It's actually a really good oblique exercise. So we don't know the exact specifics of how much it activates the obliques, external and internal, or the rectus abdominis, or the TRA. So I'm going entirely on this one off of clinical and personal fitness experience. But I can tell you that when you do this correctly, you will feel a very strong oblique contraction and probably have some delayed onset muscle soreness the next day. So as we know, the obliques do two things. They rotate. We'll be looking at that in just a little bit. But here it is side bending. Now, the way I have the Roman chair set up right now relative to the camera is I'm initially going to be side bending towards my left, and then where I'm going to really get the contraction is when I side bend back up to the right. So whatever direction you're coming back up with, that's the foot that's going to be in front when you plant them. Because the way the Roman chair is set up when you do side bends is one foot's going to have to be in front. You use a staggered stance. So because I'm going to be side bending up to the right, my left one's going to be in the back, my right one's going to be in the front. So let me get in position here. So there I have it. Feet are locked in here. Got my side of my hips against the pads here, and I'm ready to do the side bend. Now, when you do this movement, you're going to get air in your lungs first. Doesn't have to be maximal, but you're going to need some to exhale when you come back up, okay? The other thing we want to focus on is making it slow and controlled and being intentional with every part of the movement. So I'm going to put one hand behind my head here. I could put a second hand here, but if I wanted to add resistance, I would just hold a weight down here and use that for added resistance, okay? So let's pretend I've got a weight here. This hand's behind my head. I'm going to inhale before I go down. I'm going to side bend down with control, and then exhale as I come back up like I'm blowing out a candle. Now what you see there is my belly button is my pivot point. So I'm not doing like any weird movements at the hips. I want to focus on making the rotation occurring about the belly button. That's going to give me the best oblique activation and take the hips out of it as much as possible, okay? So again, belly button's the pivot point. Inhale. Overall, your belly button shouldn't translate that much in any direction. Now, if you don't have a Roman chair like this, whether at home or at a gym, you can still do a similar exercise. You'll just do it in standing, and you'll need a dumbbell or a kettlebell or something like that, okay? I don't find this exercise quite as good as doing it on a Roman chair, but depending on how much weight you use here, you can get some serious oblique activation. It's a very similar exercise. The pivot point is still going to be the belly button, and with whatever hand is not holding the weight, we're going to put that hand behind our head. And then again, I'm going to rotate down, exhale on the way up. You do not need to overshoot it and go the other way. You're not going to get any more oblique activation doing that, okay? So inhale a little bit at the top, bend, exhale and come back up to the top. Now, when you're doing this exercise, if you're getting a lot of hip shift the other way, that certainly will work some muscles, but we want to really take the hip shift out of that as much as possible and focus entirely on the side bend, minimizing hip shift using our belly button as the fulcrum or the pivot point. So we just took a look at a couple exercises for strengthening the obliques, specifically their side bending function. But as we know, the obliques also participate in rotation, so we need to strengthen that as well. So for this exercise, we're going to use a heavy band. Some people call them monster bands. They're pull-up bar bands, but they're not the typical elastic bands that you get in a physical therapy clinic. You usually have to order these online, and I'll put a link in the description of this video of one type that you can order off of Amazon, okay? You can also, if you're at a gym, you can use a cable machine with a little handle that attaches. That'll work just fine. So this exercise is based off an exercise for the transverse abdominis called the Paloff Press. We'll be going over that in another video, but let me just show you the basic Paloff Press. So what you're going to do is you're going to hold the band in one hand, interlock the fingers and clasp the hands, and hold that really around the xiphoid process. So basically right below the pec muscles at the very top of the abdomen. And this position right here, you're going to inhale through your nose. And then at the same time that you press this out, you're going to exhale like you're blowing out a candle. So let's put that all together. Inhale, exhale, and press. And that is a muscle that specifically targets the transversus abdominis muscle, the deepest core muscle. It will get a little bit of obliques, but it's mainly the TRA. So if we want to get the obliques more, we're going to have to modify the movement. It's going to look very similar. It's still going to involve a band like this, same grip, maybe a cable. It's going to have the same breathing pattern, except instead of pressing this out, we're going to involve rotation. So the way I think about this movement is right here in the center, this is your neutral position. I'm going to be moving here between about 30 to 45 degrees toward the anchor, and 30 to 45 degrees away from the anchor of the band. So this arc right here, this is where I am moving, okay? So what you're gonna do is, you're gonna start in this position here. The way I usually cue patients is we're trying to get pretty much entirely trunk rotation. So your pelvis should still be facing forward, your head should still be facing forward, and your arms and torso are going to move as one unit. That's going to really light up your obliques, okay? So we're going to start here, knees slightly bent. Inhale through the nose. Exhale and rotate. Inhale through the nose. Exhale and rotate. All right? And then there are two more abdominal exercises that we can do involving the power wheel ab roller. If we just have a regular ab roller that only has the handles on it, no foot attachment, you can't do these two exercises. You can do them, however, with a TRX suspension system where you can hook the feet in and do these exercises. But if you just have the regular ab roller, it won't work. If you're going to use an ab roller, it has to be a power wheel type with the foot attachments. I will put a link to this particular one in the description of this video. So let's take a look at these. You can do these with the hands on the floor flat. I actually prefer to use these so I can be a little bit elevated off the ground, get a little extra space for my legs to get under me. And you can see back here, my feet are already anchored in this power wheel. The first one is going to look really similar to the hanging knee up. It's essentially just an abdominal crunch, maybe a full sit-up if you want to think about it that way, using our feet in the power wheel ab roller. So the first step of this one is, first of all, to get on the ab roller like this, essentially in a push-up position. And then I'm going to crunch this up and back out with control. Crunch this up and back out with control. You should, at the top here, feel the abdominal muscles working. That's the first one. The second one is the pike. And to think about a pike type of exercise, you're thinking of the downward dog position in yoga. You're going to keep the knees straight on this one and essentially get into downward dog, but using the power wheel. So again, the first step here, get on the power wheel. And then this time when I crunch up, I keep the knees more or less straight. Back out with control, crunch up at the top. You might feel the hip flexors working at the top as well, but the main goal of this is to really engage the rectus abdominis at the top of the movement. So that concludes this video. And whether you are a physical therapist, a personal trainer, or you're just someone generally into fitness and wanting to strengthen all aspects of your core, I hope this video gave you some good evidence-based takeaways of how you can strengthen yourself or your patients or clients. In the next video, we're going to go more after the transversus abdominis. We're going to see what the evidence says on how you best strengthen that muscle, so make sure to join us then. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification button for notifications for all videos in the future. Thank you so much.